17, 1 Samuel 17, and you'll see in the title we called it Yahweh, the Giant Slayer. Now, maybe you were like me, and I wasn't raised in church, and so when I started going as a teenager, I went by myself, well, with my grandmother, but then I went by myself, and then I would go with youth events. And I remember I went to this youth event one time, and remember, I'm growing up in church, I might have knew some of the lingo, like it didn't really confuse me to say what it meant to be saved. You know, that's confusing to some people. They don't really know what that means. You say, well, you're lost, you need to be saved. They're like, I know where I'm at, but they don't understand the lingo. But we have all kinds of different lingo. It's kind of scary, right? You know that song we sing, I love it. There is a fountain filled with blood drawn from Emmanuel's veins, and every sinner plunged beneath that flood lose all his guilty stains. That sounds terrible, unless we know what it's talking about, right? So you don't know the lingo. But I remember I was walking and I seen a sign one time and it said Yahweh, and I was like, I thought this was a Baptist church. What does that mean? Right? What is Yahweh? Right? And it wasn't until much later I figured out that was a name. That's the name for God. In fact, that's the name for God that you see in the Old Testament. So, those of you that might not know, I want you to know why that was in the title, Yahweh, the Giant Slayer. There's no way of saying God, the Giant Slayer. In your Bible, most of the time you'll see it translated as Lord with all caps. And it'll just say that, L-O-R-D, all capital letters. And that was really Yahweh translated into the English. But we're in 1 Samuel 17, and if you've looked at the heading of your Bible, you probably already know what we're going to be talking about. It is a very, very popular story, the story of David and Goliath. Right? It's a story that we tell kids. It's one of the main ones that's a Bible lesson. But because of that, and if y'all are like me, you've heard them before, there are some really bad, really good, but also really bad David and Goliath messages. So I want to start off by mentioning that. Every commentary I was reading as I was preparing and studying and reading the Word and going back and listening to what some other guys have said, they all said the same thing. Every time I've heard a sermon on David and Goliath, it's always been about something to the extent of facing the giants in your life. The only problem with that is every commentary said this is not about facing the giants in your life. So, something's got to be reconciled here. And we're going to see maybe a little bit of a fresh take or a refocus on what we see actually happening in 1 Samuel 17 with David and Goliath. I'm not going to read the whole chapter. You're going to see we'll bounce around a little bit. We'll start in verses 4 and 11, 26 through 30. I'll tell you what was going on sort of in between there. So the first things were they all gathered up to battle, and they're standing in line across from one another across this long valley. And verse 4 picks up and begins to introduce us to Goliath. That's what it says, 17 verse 4. And there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail. And the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had bronze armor on his legs, and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. His shield bearer went before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he's able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." And when Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. We're going to be going to verse 26, but of course in between there, we know that David, who was just anointed king, is now, he's back in the fields. Well, this is where we know he's still in the fields, right? He's in the fields with his father Jesse, and his father Jesse is sending David to go to his brothers on the battlefield. The way it worked back then was the army didn't necessarily supply all the needs. Each soldier's family was responsible for it. And so they were going to provide resources and supplies for the brothers that were fighting in the battle. And so Jesse sends David, his son, and he sends them out to the front lines. Now David leaves his sheep with a shepherd, because he's a good shepherd. He wouldn't just want to leave them alone. It says he leaves early in the morning, and he leaves somebody to watch over them. And he takes off, headed towards the battle. Now the reason we know he left so early is because he got there in time to hear Goliath's speech. And he said he did that twice a day, once in the morning, once in the evening. And so we pick up in verse 26. After hearing the speech, David says this. And David said to the men who stood by him, "What shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away this reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" And the people answered him in the same way, so shall it be done to the man who kills him. Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and said, Why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. And David said, What have I done now? Was it not but a word? And he turned away from him and toward another, and he spoke in the same way. And the people answered him again as before. We continue in verse 31. When the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul. And he sent for him. And David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, You are not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth. And he has been a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, Your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And when there came a lion or a bear, and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him, and I struck him, and I delivered it out of his mouth. And he arose against me. I caught him by his beard, and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them. For he has defied the armies of the living God. And David said, The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, Go, and the Lord be with you. Of course, immediately after that, he tries to give him his armor. His armor doesn't fit very well, and so he tries it on, he takes it off. He says, I haven't tested these things. And rather, he picks up his sling, he gets 5 smooth stones, and he goes out to face the giant. We look at verse 42, and we finish off the story. It says this, And when the Philistines looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. And the Philistine said to David, Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field. And then David said to the Philistine, You come to me with sword and with spear and with javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. I will strike you down and cut off your head. I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves, not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. When the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone. He slung it, and he struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and fell on his face to the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and he struck the Philistine and killed him. And there was no sword in the hand of David. Then David ran, stood over the Philistine, took his sword, and drew it out of his sheath, and killed him, and cut off his head with it. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. And so, what we have right after that is they begin to flee. Israel chases them down. And then Saul, interestingly enough, we're not going to read it, but at the very end of it, he doesn't recognize David. He says, Who is this that did this thing? Abner had to remind him who David was. One said that there might be a problem with the timeline here. The more likely thing is that it already told us that David was spending time between Saul's kingdom, playing the music, and in the field. He wasn't a very good leader. He probably wouldn't pay attention to David, wouldn't recognize him. So it's not too surprising that he didn't notice him. But as we pick up in this common story, let me tell you about the first point. It's this. David's concern was God's honor. David's concern was God's honor. Now, as I've already said, he goes back to serving in the field, but he comes out and he sees Goliath. And this story is a popular story for an important reason, because it was meant to be, right? In the Old Testament, you can see lots of stories that get told rather quickly, but this is one that's a little bit longer. That's a little bit longer. You often don't see this much dialogue take place in these stories either. Normally it's somebody telling you the story. So when we see Goliath and David talking back with one another, it tells you that in the midst of 1 Samuel, the writer decided this is so important, I want people to slow down and pay attention to what happens in this scene. Right? So that's the reason it's become so popular for us, and we have it in children's Bibles and all those other things. This is a very, very famous story for known reasons. But as he approaches this point, he begins to tell us more detail about Goliath than almost anybody. It says Goliath comes out, it says he's 6 cubits in the span. That means that there's debate about the height. Here's the thing. Some people say that stands for 9 foot. I tend to agree with that. Others say it was 6'9". Either way, he was a hoss. Right? I mean, that's basically it. I don't think I'd run from this 9-foot guy. I'd also run from the 6'9" guy. Okay, that's a big dude. And he's also wearing the armor. The armor, so it weighs somewhere from 125 to 150 pounds worth of his armor. The spear, the tip of the spear was 15 pounds. It doesn't sound like much, but it's not a very effective weapon. I mean, it is if you're big, but they often said this was probably just for show. That he might not have even used the spear. It might have just been for an intimidation factor because it was way too heavy for it to actually be useful. But regardless, he has all this stuff on him. He's a big guy. He's standing up and he's defying the Lord's armies. He's making all these taunting statements towards Israel. And they say this might have been a practice back in the day where, obviously, instead of all of us fighting and having a bunch of bloodshed, you face me one-on-one, whoever wins, wins. Well, the problem with that is I don't think anybody actually honored that practice because they didn't honor it either. What happens at the end, since we already read the whole story, David wins. Do they all become their servants? No, they take off running. Right? They leave. They're scared. They're not actually going to hold up their end of the bargain. But regardless, Yahweh is taunting Israel, and all those soldiers sit there greatly afraid, dismayed. Now, it's worth noting as well that, this is all based on history. I don't know how well we know for sure, but the Israelites were not known to be very big people. Right? Talking 5 foot something, not 6 foot. So that compared to Goliath was really, really intimidating to them. But here comes David. David shows up on the scene, delivers the food to where it needs to go, and runs to go see his brothers. When he hears Goliath saying this, he doesn't respond like everybody else. He can't believe it. See, remember now, he's an Israelite, he's a shepherd, but this might have been the first time he's actually heard people cursing God. And he hasn't had that much experience with the Philistines. And so when he hears such unsavory language, especially directed towards the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, the one that he knows is the one true God, he can't believe it. He says, they might be used to it, but I'm not used to it. And he begins to say, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should talk about God? Right? Basically what his concern here is that God is being defamed, that God's the one being made fun of. Now, I think it's funny, if you have an older brother, Eliab reminds you of him a little bit, because all David's doing is, I think, being a pretty cool guy. Right? He's showing up, he's talking to everybody, and he says, who does this guy think he is? And here comes his older brother to come rain on his parade. Right? But one note there, it is interesting that when you're trying to do something for the Lord, it's a sad fact, but it's a true fact, that sometimes the people closest to you that should be on your side are the very ones that try to discourage you and hold you back. And that's what happens here. He runs into him and his brother says, what are you doing? I know why you're here. You just wanted to see the battle. But really, he's jealous because he wasn't selected to be the king. David was. And so he sees that he's jealous, and he also says, you had evil intentions in your heart. And David says, all I did was ask a question. What happens to a guy who kills Goliath? And he left and he kept asking other people. He ignored his brother, which was a good practice. But as he comes to the point, he says, he's going to do it. And of course, he's going to be taken to Saul. We'll get to that in a minute. But the thing here is, what did David keep asking around for? He was worried about God's honor. That's an important point. I'm not a big fan of, I won't say big fan of, I'm just not super comfortable around salesmen. And unless you're a salesman, you're probably not either. Any of you yard salesmen, you're probably still uncomfortable. I'm not comfortable with them. I think it's a gift, right? I think the people that are really good salesmen, they sort of wow me. Have you ever bought something before and then you leave and you're like, why'd I do that? Right? That person was really good, right? They can really talk well and so make everything sound like a good decision. But I'm not comfortable with them mainly because of the pressure and all that stuff. And there might be some good salesmen. There's always that pushy salesman, and I don't respond well to pushiness. Right? You start trying to push me into something, I just shut down and leave. Right? Anybody else like that? No, that's me. And so I hate it, but I was recently in Greenville and I was talking with a boy. I actually went to school with him. And he's now working, he's working at an insurance company, but he also handles on his own like retirement funds. He's a broker type thing. He does all that kind of stuff. And so we were meeting and talking, and I hadn't seen him since high school. So it's been a number of years. And I said, we sat down, and he's trying to do the small talk. That's what you got to do if you're going to be a salesman. You got to try to build the face with me. And he says the weirdest things. First, he goes, "Oh, you had a child, didn't you?" I said, "I guess he was on Facebook." I said, "Yeah, I did." "Oh, when was her birthday again?" And I told him. He's like, "Oh, that's right." Like he knew. He didn't know. And then he said, "What's your birthday?" And then October 25th, and as soon as he started to say it, he finished by saying, it's October 25th. That's right, I remember now. It's October 25th. I'm like, you don't know my birthday, and I don't know your birthday, and that's okay. Right? You don't got to send me nothing. You just got to do whatever it is we're talking about doing. This is business. But he's working really hard to try to get this base with me. And that's just sort of annoyed me, really. And he wasn't a bad guy, but I didn't go with him. Not for any other reason, but I won't tell you who he is. In case you want to go with him, I think he'd probably do a good job. But the thing is, that was nickels and dimes. It was business talk. I wasn't going to be shattered because he forgot my birthday. Right? That wasn't what was my big concern in all of it. But don't you hate it when somebody who acts like they care for you and they really don't? I expect it with a salesman some way. I knew he was just doing his job. Right? He's trying to touch base with me so that we have this personal connection. But it hurts a lot more when there are people that feel like you really have a personal connection with, and they don't really care about you. They're just using you, and that could be the worst thing in the world. Not that you ever regret the things that you've done, but because you actually thought and cared. People seem like they're on your side, but it's only because it benefits them. And why am I saying that? What's that got to do with this point about David and his concern with God's honor? It's because, unfortunately, this has all too often been the application for David and Goliath. This is when we begin to bust up some of those things that I mentioned at the very beginning that have been sort of problems. You may have heard that you have Goliath in your life that needs slaying, but for many people, those things were things such as a personal financial need, a job promotion, a relationship, a dead-end job, barriers for personal growth. And while all those things might be somewhat bad, what often happens in this text is we say, well, look here, I've got a Goliath in my life. If I just trust God, He'll get rid of the Goliath. God never promises to get rid of all your problems. He never does. He says He'll walk with you through them. He'll be there through it. He says you should pray about them. How do we know this to be true? How do we know this to be the case? Well, it's pretty simple. I think you could probably just take one stroll through the backyard. And you see some people who may have lived long lives and passed from old age, but you probably see a lot of other people that were probably taken what seemed like way before their time. Maybe people who got cancer, and they prayed, and the Lord didn't heal the cancer, but He did. He took them home. And for us to think for a minute here, well, if I just trusted God more, that Goliath would have been gone from my life. I know way too many saints that have passed on that trusted God. And they're with Him now. But it wasn't because they held on to some idea that as long as I do it, He'll get rid of Goliath in my life. The fact is, we should care about God and follow Him, not because just the things that He can do for us, but we do it because of what He's done for us already. I mean, God is worthy of all praise and honor and glory, and if He never gives me anything else, He's already given me way too much. When He gave me His Son. The reason we praise Him isn't so He'll continue to do things. The reason we praise Him is because of Him, I'm set free from sin. I love the song, How Great the Father's Love for Us, that the choir sang at the very end. It's a hook, but they ended with it, which I thought was great. It says, why should I gain from His reward? I cannot give Him answer. This I know with all my heart. His wounds have paid my ransom. Amen. That is what it's about. So to say all that we can trust Jesus to get past our Goliath, we got to stop and say for a minute, that's hogwash. Really what we need to do is, God often can face all these problems in our lives. It's evidence. But the fact is that David got riled up, not because he had a giant in his life that he needed to get over for personal growth. Like I said, that's what you hear all the time. But it wasn't because David seen Goliath. He says, boy, I got to get rid of Goliath. Notice what made David so mad. God's honor. He walked up and he said, Goliath can talk about me and y'all all he wants. But now this uncircumcised Philistine is talking about my Lord. That's one step too far. And so he gets riled up. The thing is, he was concerned about God's honor. His cause was one that was about the cause of God and not David. This is what we've got to ask ourselves. Do we live for the cause of Christ or do we live for the cause of ourselves? and sometimes mask it as the cause of Christ. We got to make sure that our real concern is for Him. Second, we see this, that David's courage was in God's strength. David's courage was in God's strength. Now, this is another memorable part of the story. Y'all, when I was reading and studying this week, I'm telling you, I know I've already mentioned it, but I'll mention it again. All the sermons I've ever heard on David and Goliath were running through my head. How many of you, everybody heard a sermon on David and Goliath before? Okay. Well, if you all raised your hands. Anyways, if you've never have, right, surely you have. You've heard a BBS story or something. So all these stories are running through my head. And not only did I hear the part about when David went and faced Goliath, but the only thing I remember hearing about too was his training. Right? He goes before Saul. Saul says, "Bring to me David." And David comes up to him and says, I'm going to take him on. Now, we already know that he was a ruddy boy, which I mentioned before, just means runty, right? He's sort of a runt, he's more of a weaker. It calls him handsome, but they thought that would have meant more so boyish looking, so he didn't look very burly and scary and intimidating, right? And so David walks up to Saul and says, I'm going to go fight Goliath for you. Your prayers are answered. Here I am. Boy, that wouldn't make you very comfortable, would it? Right? But he sees him, and Saul answers pretty bluntly, you can't do it. You're way too small. The boy's 9 foot tall, David. Have you seen him? Did you see the armor he's wearing? You don't stand a chance. He says, you have been in the field since the youth, but he's been a man of war since his youth. Do you really think you stand a chance? And then David begins to list off his resume. He says, while I was in the fields, if a lion or a bear came and took one of the sheep or the lambs, I went and got it. If it kind of turned on me, I'll grab it by its beard and strike it down. He says, I killed the lions and the bears, and I can kill this Philistine too. Now, I was studying that. Oftentimes I've always heard, and I think there's a certain level of truth to it. The fact is that God puts you, we talked about this on Wednesday night, God puts you in seasons in your life where He's training you and preparing you for something that's to come that you might not even know yet. You don't know why you're going through such a hard time right now, but wait to see what's behind the next corner and you're going to figure it out. Right? And then there'll be something else you don't know. So don't ever expect to have all the answers here and now. We won't. Right? But we follow God one step of the way. And so each step of the way, He might be doing something in our life. But here's a big thing. I often heard it taught. Well, David was in the fields, and during that time, God was grooming David to be this awesome warrior. That he was able to take down the lions and take down the bears. And now he's prepared to take down this Philistine. He got so good with that slingshot, he could hit anything he aimed at. He was ready. No, he wasn't. That's kind of the big point. That's kind of the end. We go, what? That worked? It wasn't because David walked in, I'm prepared for this. Notice what David said at the end of his whole listing things off. He says all of that, and then he says this. The Lord who saved me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will save me from the hand of this Philistine as well. David's courage wasn't because he'd been trained. David's courage was in God's strength. David was excited because he knew that God was the one that could take out the wild animals, had took care of him in the fields, and is going to take care of him here and now as he faces this giant. The issue wasn't here David building up his own self-esteem. Because think about it just for a minute. If that was the case, it was just all about David getting all his practice in the fields, the opposite of David would probably be Goliath. David's background sounds nice, but let's take a minute and look at Goliath. It says he's a man of war since his youth. So David might have been every now and then chasing down a lion or bear, but Goliath was training to be a soldier. He probably endured all types of stuff as a young type. I don't know what they really did, but I think about like the movie 300 and the Spartans, and they're out there beating them with sticks when they're like 8 years old, right? That's the kind of stuff I picture happening with Goliath. He was a man of war, he was being trained, he was being groomed to be a warrior. He was blessed with tremendous size and strength. He had heavy-duty armor and loads of experience. So if anybody walks up and says, well, I fought lions and bears, Goliath could still laugh at that fellow. Because he was a man of war from his youth. The issue wasn't here how great David was. The issue here was how great David's God was. His God was real. Goliath wasn't. His God had his back. Goliath trusted only in himself. That was the difference between the two of them. Goliath had his courage in his own strength. David had his courage in God's strength. That's the crucial difference. I can't stand cheesy quotes, and so that's often why I don't say I hate Facebook, but you ever scroll through Facebook and you cringe? Ugh, you see something real dumb. Some of you do, right? And so I see something. Here's one I hear. If you've ever said this before, I sort of apologize. Notice I said sort of. No. Anyways, this is one I've heard before. Somebody will randomly put on Facebook, God gives his hardest battles to his strongest warriors. That is a self-defeating statement. What do I mean by that? God gives his hardest battles to his strongest warriors. That's self-defeating because often if someone says that, they tend to think that they are one of those strongest warriors. They think, boy, I got so many problems in my life, I must be pretty great. Well, if you think that, you already aren't strong enough to do it. Right? That's the big point here. That it isn't that our strength is something we're resting in. I don't ever want to get to a point where I think I'm self-sufficient. Because when I think I'm self-sufficient, y'all, that's the danger we get to the point where we think we can do things and we fail. Doesn't it stink to get halfway down a trail and realize you've been trusting yourself the whole way? And you're lost? No, our courage shouldn't ever be in the fact that we think we've arrived or we've gotten there. That's the false. That's something that America would want to teach us sometimes, and these other Western countries, because it's all about individualism and materialism and trying to make yourself great. But no, we're not trying to make ourselves great. We serve one who's great. We serve one who's great. And it isn't that. We don't have a right to be prideful about our own strength and abilities. Whatever God's gift has blessed us with or me with, I'm thankful for it, but my only true hope is Him. The healthiest body can still have a heart attack, and we already know death is no respecter of persons. We don't have that type of hope in ourselves. We can't let our courage be in our own strength. You really think you might have some giants in your life? Let's put a connection to it. That's true. There's things that come up in your life that seem like Goliaths. But the worst thing you can do is think that something that's a Goliath in your life is only a Goliath because it's important to you and it's not important to God or His purposes for you. You might get a promotion and get a nicer car, but I'm going to tell you that God doesn't care about a nice car. And the worst thing you can do is think, God's brought me through so much, I can take down this giant. If David would have thought that, I think we'd be having a shorter story, a very different story. I think David would have got to that. Because the issue here isn't the awesome man of war David. The hero of this story is God. The one who stands behind David, the one that protects him from the paw of the lion, the paw of the bear, the one that protects him from this Philistine, the one that thinks, you ever heard guys talk about, and we'll get to this in a minute, but they talk about the slingshot and they say, well, it just sounds, I know if you're like me, I picture the little cheap slingshots that you get from the dollar store that break after a couple tries, and you got a little arm brace on it, and you shoot your brother with it and all that kind of stuff, your older brother, right? Anyways, you have that kind of slingshot, but no, they said his was a sling, and he's got these stones, and I said the stones could be this size or that size, and I've heard people say, if you slung it really, really fast and then let the thing go, it'd be going at this speed, and when it hits you in the head, it will kill you. And they're trying to basically prove to make the story make sense, because doesn't it sound kind of wild for a 9-foot giant to be taken out by a slingshot? But all of that, I don't care about either. The issue isn't how fast was the stone going, how hard did he throw it. The issue was God guided the stone, and He can bring down the giant. Yeah, it could be a freak accident, but I'm going to say it's a miracle. And I don't explain away God's miracles, because the reality is He can do things that don't make any sense. And that's the very point of it. And so we make sure if David runs up to Goliath, prideful and concerned only for himself, he likely ends up dead. But then finally we see this. David's conquest was God's victory. Well, David finally faces Goliath, and Goliath does what we all expect. He laughs at him. He says some pretty hurtful things. He says, do you think I'm a dog that you come to me with sticks? That's some trash talk. That's some good trash talk. And David didn't go along with the trash talk. He begins to, Goliath keeps making fun of him, laughing. He says, why don't you come here, David, and I'll let the birds feast on your flesh in no time. But David's response was focused and it's clear. Listen to what he says. Verse 45. You come to me with a sword and with a a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands," that's fate, "and I will strike you down and cut off your head, and I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air, to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And that all this assembly," and here's the key, "may know that the Lord saves, not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." David answers him with a powerful speech about the victory that he's about to win, being for God and God alone, and then the battle ensues. They begin to face off with one another. Yeah, David is Goliath 9 foot or 6'9", whatever you want to say. Regardless, you know, if you have a little height on you, I'm not that tall, but I know enough to say I'm not very coordinated or agile. Right? I'm slower. I can tend to fumble around. We used to play basketball some. We got to start that back. David and T.I. and some others out in the gym. And if I start falling, I fall hard. Right? I'm not very good at getting around. I remember I had to wrestle this boy in elementary school one time. It was one of those things where they thought, boy, Dalton's going to beat him good. But he was short and fast, and he went through my legs so many times I don't know where he went, and then I ended up on my back. So regardless, Goliath is big, David says small, and it says David runs towards him quickly. David probably had the agility, he's probably dodging and dodging, and then he slings that stone. And the stone goes and it's straight into his forehead, and it hits him. It fells Goliath. He falls down, it knocked him out, and then David goes and kills him with his own sword, cuts off his head, and makes it clear that this victory was God's victory. He won, and the clear winner was God. He knew that before he even started the fight. I've been to a good bit of church conferences before, different conferences on leadership, Southern Baptist Convention even. And whether it's just youth, even youth conferences, or just the church in general, at these big conferences, they always advertise the speakers. It's kind of the thing, right? They might advertise who's playing the music, and then they advertise the speaker. And for better or for worse, and y'all know this too, y'all have been to some, and so I've done it, you've probably done it, so shame on all of us. But we judge whether or not we're going to stay or not based on who the speaker is. I don't want to hear him, right? He goes somewhere else. I want to go wait for the good guy. That's not the big guy that we want to hear about. I'll save my concentration for that minute. And we may do that, and that's a bad thing to do. But before a guy comes up to speak, some host gets up and he probably gives a short bio in essence to make sure you're connected with the speaker and who he is, give you a little bit of background on him. And it builds the credibility of the speaker, so you know that if you don't know the guy at all, well, I should listen to him because he's done such and such. Right? But here's the thing about it. Almost every time I've been to one of these, as for church speakers, oftentimes their credibility is the ministry success that an individual has. They may say things like this. I've heard this a lot. Under his leadership, the church doubled in size in 6 months. Or something like that. The only problem with that is the Bible tells us that God gives the increase. And so that even if God did bless a certain person in ministry, I'm not saying it's wrong to say that, but that's a bad thing to say, but it is something that we always boast about, especially at these conferences, in order to build somebody's credibility. The reality is that God gives the increase. Can we ever really brag for personal victories if we truly didn't have anything to do? I'll give an example. I came here from Baptist Grove Baptist Church. I love Baptist Grove Baptist Church. If you ever go to Fuquay Ram, North Carolina, I know you've never heard of it. But if you ever go up there and check them out, go to Baptist Grove Baptist Church. Pastor Ben Pierce, he was texting me during the Clemson game on Monday. He's an NC State fan, so he doesn't have a good life. But regardless, he was texting me and saying he was hopeful for us. Of course, that was the first quarter. But then we were going back and forth. I love them. Love Baptist Grove. But when I first went there, we were going on a youth trip. It was already scheduled. I came in after it was already scheduled. It was actually Camp Caswell. It's the camp that youth went to last year and we're planning on going to this year. It's the first time I'd ever been, and it was already scheduled. So we went, and he told me, he said, "You might have a handful go. Our youth isn't very together right now." We ended up having a good group go. We had about 15. And the place I'd been before, one of the problems wasn't the youth, it was just the apathy. The parents didn't care about anything. They didn't really care about church. And so guess what? Kids didn't either. Right? It was just sort of, if we come, we come. If we don't, we don't. It's whatever. You know? And that was kind of depressing, right? Because I really wanted to see these kids get involved and engaged, but it was hard because, you know, their parents didn't care. And so when I came to Baptist Grove, I was sort of like, is this group going to be the exact same way? And something weird happened. On that summer camp, it was probably the first night. We had a session. After the session, you go back for your church group time. And I remember talking and sharing. I'm sort of just emphasizing what the speaker talked about that night and asking our kids if they had any questions. And here comes one of the girls crying. So I talked with her. She prayed to receive Christ. Then the next morning, the same thing happened. And I'm not kidding. You know, I didn't do anything. I didn't went on the trip. It was already scheduled. Right? And so the kids kept coming up to me afterwards, and it may not sound like much, but out of 15 that we took, 5 prayed to receive Christ during that week. And I went back and told the pastor, and he was like, "What'd you do?" I said, "Nothing. God just happened to put me in the spot where I was able to talk to him." And why do I share that for? I share it because I didn't get to go back and have a struggle and say, "The best youth pastor you ever had in the world has arrived. We went on this week-long trip. I don't know what y'all been doing before, but now 5 of them got saved, thanks to me." Wrong. I said, God did it. I can't explain it. And you know what it was for me? It was a season of revival and encouragement that came in and said, "I'm still in the mood. I'm still here. Just listen." You know, the same was true for David. He faced Goliath, but he said before and he said after, God gets the glory for it. He's the one that does the work. And y'all, that's what we're living for. It can be so easy to start chasing our own glory. And like I said, even sometimes to our own shame, mask it as service to the Lord, when really it's service for our own selves and our own name and our own glory. That can't be the case, y'all. We're serving one who's worthy of it all. And so our lives are died to self, and we're raised to live with Him. The fact is, He gets all the praise and honor. As believers, we have to remember that in this story, we aren't David. Right? If anyone is meant to be David, it's Jesus. Because Jesus was the very one who took on His kingly robes and then shed them to come and be with us. David couldn't wear the armor. Jesus laid his aside. Rather, He came to serve us and die for us so that we would then be children of God. He's the one who did what we truly couldn't do. He faced the Goliath of evil and sin, and He defeated it by nailing it to the cross. He is our victor, and He is the only sure hope that we have. So as I've said over and again, and I'm going to keep saying it, when we face death, and when we face God, and we face Judgment Day, we can't ever talk about all the things that we've done. Because they don't amount to much. We boast in the fact that Jesus died on the cross for us. When Paul boasted, he boasted in the cross. He had a lot to boast about. He was a smart guy. He wrote a lot of the Bible. He had a lot of people that came to Christ under him. If Paul went to speak at a conference, everybody would want to go listen to Paul. Even though he wasn't known as the great speaker, he was the great reputation, right? So we don't go see him. We pay a lot of money and go see what he had to say. But when he gets to the point, he'd say, "Guess what, y'all? I already wrote 1st, 2nd Corinthians, Romans, 1st, 2nd Timothy." You can go read those. Because the reality is that God is the one who's so great. God is the giant slayer. So what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to honor His name, trust His strength, and give praise for His mighty works. God does care about the problems in our lives. The question we have to ask ourselves is this: do we care about Him more than we care about the problems in our lives?